Alright, here we go. Let's finish this. Finally up to the last film, the last official film of Universal's a Mummy series, with 1944's The Mummy's Curse. Or at least the back of this also says 44. And although this was not the last film with Universal's Mummy that they did, because 11 years later, in 55, there was Abbott Costello Meet the Mummy, which I'm not going to review right off, because I know I did Abbott Costello Meet Frankenstein, and I know there's Abbott Costello Meet the Invisible Man. I'll probably just do those back to back. As a whole, I have not been into this series, and I'm actually kind of relieved to be talking about the final one in the official series, The Mummy's Curse. Oh, it came out the same year as the previous film, 1944. It's the fifth entry in their films, but it's only the fourth of the actual series. Because for whatever reason, the original The Mummy with Boris Karloff was, again, not part of the series. And I guess my overall problem with this series is, like I've said in every video, I've never been that big of a fan of this kind of monster. I mean, when I was a young kid, maybe at some point I liked the Goosebumps Mummy. But more often than not, I haven't just really been a big fan of mummies. And I know I've said that in every video in this series, but it kind of makes sense because all these movies are the fucking same. There's always a high priest with a younger follower or counterpart or someone helping him with Karis the mummy complete some sort of task, whether it be kill certain people or find the body of, the princess, or, recapture the princess after she's been brought back. And there's always people to stop them. There's always the damsel in distress at the end that has to get rescued. Almost every movie is the same. And the continuity in this series is terrible. Because you have The Mummy's Hand, which takes place in 1940. Then you have The Mummy's Tomb and The Mummy's Ghost, take place 30 years later, so 1970. And then The Mummy's Curse takes place 25 years after that, so it takes place in 1995. But they don't really draw much attention to it. They just kind of say 30 years ago or 25 years ago. And they don't really do anything. It looks exactly like the 1940s still. And this film, The Mummy's Curse, I was getting vibes of a Battle for the Planet of the Apes, which I'm a huge Planet of the Apes fan. It's probably, of all the big, major, huge franchises that have dominated the last 50 years, like Star Trek, Star Wars, Planet of the Apes, even ones like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, Planet of the Apes is my favorite. I mean, yeah, Evil Dead is my favorite horror series, but Planet of the Apes is my favorite franchise. Old and new, except for the Tim Burton movie. And Battle for the Planet of the Apes is the last film. You can tell they knew it was going to be the last film because you look at the budget, you look at how cheaply it's made, the simplicity of everything, even though that movie's supposed to have an epic battle. This movie kind of feels the same way. And back to the continuity, I mean, the mummy's tomb was supposed to take place in uh, Massachusetts. And then the mummy's ghost, between like the beginning and the end, it's supposed to go from Massachusetts to the Louisiana Bayou, which is where that movie ends. And now the last film, The Curse, is all Louisiana. It's all swamps, and there's Cajuns and bayous, and the stereotypical Cajuns like freaking out about voodoo and stuff like that. And the story's still just exactly the same. You have, basically, there's this engineering company that wants to drain the swamp for whatever public reason. The swamp that Karis and Ananka went into and perished at the end of the last film. But superstitions of the workers and locals are stopping them because they believe there's a mummy and his bride in the swamp. So these two representatives of this museum, we have Dr. James Halsey, which I didn't pick up on that while I was watching it, but just looking at this, Jim Halsey from The Hitcher, the C. Thomas Howell's character's name, and he's played by a guy named Dennis Moore. This almost sounds made up. Dennis Moore is a Robin Hood type character on Monty Python, played by John Cleese, who steals nothing but lupins from the rich for the poor. The poor gets pissed, says lupins are useless. So then he starts stealing goods from the rich, gives them to the poor, but then the poor are rich and the rich are poor, so he has to steal it all back and give it back to them. That's the whole of Dennis Moore's skit on Monty Python. Because, of course, I'm also a huge Monty Python fan. Basically, okay, so you have this guy, Zandab, who's the high priest, and Rogheb. None of these actors, you can click on their names. So they're not really anybody. Except for Lon Chaney Jr., who played Karis for the last time. Pretty much, they resurrect Karis so that he could find his bride, bring her back, and take him back to Egypt. But then, in order for her to... something has to be done, of course. They have to have the other female, the lead character's interest. She has to die. The high priest wants to have her killed, so the whole ceremony can be complete. And of course, his young apprentice guy, that's the word I was looking for, apprentice, brings in an outsider, which betrays the trust. Karis doesn't really kill many people. In fact, there's a scene, the best scene of this movie is when Ananka comes out of the drained swamp. We see her hand come out of the mud. She rises up, and the makeup looks good. She looks like dried, hardened mud. She has some great kind of stiff, undead movements. It's very slow. They take their time with it. I like how that scene is done. That's probably the best scene in the whole movie. She doesn't really know what's going on with her, but she knows who Karis is, and she's afraid of him. And there's scenes when Karis goes after her where Karis, like, his arm's always like this, unless he has to pick her up, and then his arm is fine. But he's, like, dragging his leg, so he's really slow. So, like, he'll come out of, like, a building, She'll turn around. He's out of the building. She'll run to the foreground, turn around, and then he's already like in the woods with her. So it just jumps around a lot. The makeup on Karis, this was the film where he got the simple mask to wear because he hated the kind of clay makeup that he had in the first two films. In fact, the mask that Chaney wore in this film is like the last surviving piece of Jack Pierce's work. And it's owned by this famous horror collector, Bob Burns, who also played the gorilla in the 70s version of the Ghostbusters. Totally unrelated Ghostbusters. But he has a lot of relics. Like, he also has Frankenstein's monsters boots. He has Karloff's boots. And so, yeah, that's the last surviving thing of his work, is that mask that Chaney wore in this film. Another thing is we get the whole legend of Karis again, when the younger guy has to swear to the high priest his allegiance. We get the whole unabridged legend of Karis with archive footage of the first two films. So that takes up a chunk of the 61, 62 minute runtime. And then, of course, the young guy stabs the high priest off screen, of course. And for some reason, because Karis does get Ananka, brings her to the place, that's when the high priest says, well, that other woman has to die. The young guy says no. And he kills the high priest for him, or for her. And then somehow Ananka goes back into being like mud and stone and undead. And how Karis dies in every film, except for the last one. The last one, he just went into a swamp and was done. But, I mean, being set on fire, being in a burning house, going into a swamp. This one, he's in like this cell. It's like an underground monastery. He fucks some of it up, and all these rocks tumble on top of him, and that's what kills him. And then, of course, it has the typical Hollywood ending where the main character guy, the main character girl, someone else is talking like, yeah, well, maybe now we can get back to work. And the lead guy's like, well, the guy and girl like look at each other like, well, there's some other things I gotta do first. And then, of course, they kind of laugh and they walk off. That's the end of the movie. I mean, I would say this one was probably a little bit better than the last couple. I mean, I really like the scene with Ananka coming out of the mud. I liked the setting of like the swamp and the woods. It felt the least like a Mummy movie at times. Like, even when she's being chased by Karis, there's some scenes when she's running and you can kind of see him in the background, kind of coming towards her. I thought that was kind of creepy. And, like, this movie just felt exhausted. It literally felt like Universal was limping to the barn with this one. It almost felt like... because it even came out the same damn year as the previous one. It was almost like they said, well, let's do one more, then we'll end it. Well, what do we want to do? Let's just do the same thing as the last three. Yeah, this is, without a doubt, been my least favorite series of all the Universal Classic Monsters. I do still need to see, all the sequels to The Invisible Man. The only Creature from the Black Lagoon film I've seen was the second one, Return of the Creature, because I saw it on Mystery Science Theater 3000. I didn't realize it was a sequel to Black Lagoon until I started watching it. That's a bad movie, but that was more entertaining than these. And again, the original with Boris Karloff is the only one that's worth it for me. At least as far as this series goes. Yeah, there still is Abbott Costello. I'll do that when I do the other Abbott Costello, the Invisible Man one. And, of course, after this, I think it was 4 years later, after Abbott Costello in 59, Hammer did The Mummy, which their first one, I think is called The Mummy's Tomb. No, it's just called The Mummy, I think. With Cushing as, the lead, Christopher Lee as The Mummy, and many people think it is the best Mummy movie since the Karloff one. Then, of course, they had their sequels, which I guess are not that great. I have the second one because it's part of a Hammer collection I have, so I got to get the first one. And then, of course, you got, like, the Brendan Fraser ones, which I was never a fan. I kind of liked the first Brendan Fraser one when I was a kid, but, yeah. Apart from Abbott Costello, I'm glad I'm done with this series. It's not that I hated it. I didn't hate any of these movies. I just thought they were boring and hard to get into. And it felt forced. It felt like they really wanted to make a Mummy series. But each film brought nothing new to the previous one. It's literally the same movie, maybe in a different place with a different title. But yeah, that's The Mummy's Curse, and that finally, pun intended, why not, wraps up this fucking series. Thank you for watching.